What is happening, short people? My name is KotyTang. Let me first start this video off by saying that I am not a very big comic book reader. Like anime, the majority of them are all written way too carelessly. I know there are plenty of good comics out there, I just have a very hard time finding one that I can get invested in. It's way too often that I see a lot of characters' powers constantly fluctuating. One issue they'll be unreasonably weak, and then in the next storyline, or in some cases the next issue, they'll be ridiculously strong. It seems comics especially are often placed in the hands of highly questionable people who are more often than not inserting characters entirely based off themselves and placing them into their own stories. The writers of manga and comics are also prone to creating the most god-awful characters mixed with the most god-awful character arcs known to man. Way too many writers have no concept of pacing or character development. Even though I'm not very big on reading comics, I am still an extremely huge Sonic fan, and I constantly research the lore and read through or flat out watch, if not play through, the storylines of each game. And if you couldn't tell, I'm very interested in how to write in general. So I don't use headcanons or create false narratives. Everything I judge about this comic comes directly from the already established canon, and from how storytelling works in general. When I bring up something in the canon or an inconsistency in the writing, I make sure to give a visual reference almost every time to prove that I'm not just saying whatever I want. With that said, feel free to leave your own comments down below about what you think, and I'll happily reply, even if it's just to tell me I'm wrong about something. Now, we've just finished The Revenge of Newcomers Saga, 12 issues shoddily stitched together to craft the first saga of a comic book. I've left a bunch of grievances and praises that I didn't originally give to the comic to the side, and I've compiled them into this video. I'll be giving an overall review of the comic itself, so I'll be speaking as though you've seen my videos, or at least read the issue yourself already. So, if you feel I haven't addressed something here, it's likely that I already did in one of my videos. I plan to do this kind of video at the end of every saga, and hopefully you'll walk away knowing whether or not it was any good. Sonic IDW is completely separate from the Sonic Archie series, and instead follows the lore from the video games, rather than a bunch of random ideas thrown together by writing abominations from Ken Penders and Carl Bollers. Though it is written and illustrated by many of the same team from Archie, with Ian Flynn as head writer. While Archie only loosely adapted chunks of the video games into their already heavily convoluted narratives, IDW takes place directly after Sonic Forces, beginning with The Revenge of Newcomers Saga, a name very much on the nose, and anybody familiar with Sonic heroes would immediately know that Metal Sonic was the villain, though I believe this is a fan naming of the comic, so good job, fans. I really enjoy the idea that Sonic IDW was made to start from video game canon. Though it is true that a number of characters are original to this comic and more will definitely come later, forcing the writers into this bubble of pre-established canon makes the storyline much easier to follow. It gives the writers and the readers easily accessible lore. The writers can then use the pre-established canon to do their research and learn everything they need to know to construct a believable in-universe narrative. This research should remove the chance of plot holes and continuity errors, which are problems that the Archie team constantly fell victim to while working on Sonic previously. It takes a good writer to properly recreate pre-established concepts and stories, and an even better one to create new storylines from scratch off that same system, which, in both cases, the Archie team have proven time and time again that they could not do. Now, Archie has had some really good concepts introduced before. Whether they executed them well enough, let's just say giving them this limitation is good. So hopefully we won't be getting storylines set 20 years in the future where Sonic erases his children and Shadow marries Sally, or get an entire family tree of echidnas dating all the way back to the beginning of time and far into the future. Even with that limitation, it is still solely left up to the writers to understand pacing, how to properly utilize the cast, avoid plot holes, and keep consistent with character abilities, mandates in order to create a believable scope of danger, respect, and appreciation for the characters they're writing for that sets the comic apart from glorified fan fiction and an actual acceptable piece of media for the franchise. Let me first begin by clarifying that I gave a specific criticism to the comic that I've incorrectly pointed at the IDW team. The criticism that I was confronted on has to do with Shadow's personality. It was made known to me that there is a mandate that states that Sega is the reason Shadow is portrayed so poorly and written so differently from the character he had actually come to be pre-Sonic free writers. In fact, Ian Flynn also agrees that Shadow acts incorrectly in the comic. According to the mandate, Sega essentially forces IDW to write Shadow as an edgy sociopathic loner who just makes spiteful, ignorant comments to everybody. So thank you for clarifying this to me. Although, I do have to say that I do find the mandates on the fandom Wikipedia and can gather the mandates from other fan sources, but in all my research, I find that they almost entirely come from the word of Ian Flynn every single time. I cannot confirm nor deny that the mandates he talks about are real. I've heard next to nothing from the other IDW writers saying anything about this, no matter how much I look. I have heard Aaron Weber confirm that mandates do exist, and it's true that any company would have mandates on their characters. Mandates as lore-breaking as Sega's are almost unheard of. It was claimed that the mandates on IDW wouldn't be as strict as Archie's reboot, and they'd be more case by case, only for these claims to apparently become false over time.
This is a really good question, and I'm glad that you asked it because it's also a good chance for us to clarify a bit too. His question was, in the past, has Sega put certain restrictions sort of on the characters to say Sonic can and can't do this? What are the limitations? Can he have family members? Can he show certain ranges of emotions? Right, and it's really good. I'm glad you asked that. And one of the key things I think from the Sega side and from the Sonic team side is that while there are certain rules and regulations, for example, Sonic isn't plaid, right? And that's a rule. Like if you make Sonic plaid, we can't do that. There are also certain amounts of freedoms that are allotted, and I think a lot of us, in fact all of us probably standing up here today, feels very important that the Sonic comic has certain freedoms so that they can tell stories that maybe we aren't telling within the video games. And I think that's kind of the core of what you're asking is, are they going to be able to kind of do certain things with the characters or tell certain stories that we aren't telling with the video games? And I think as far as the four of us are concerned, the answer is please and yes.
Yeah, it was very important for us to actually make sure that IDW had the freedom to make the characters do things that we really couldn't really do in the games.
That's really good. Good to hear, thanks.
And from our side, like we've done so many licensed comics, and with each of those, there are certain things that to be true to the characters and the storylines, and we've never looked at those rules as restrictions. It's more of like, what are the things that allow us to tell the best stories that represent these characters? So we're happy to adhere to anything that sort of makes for the best comics and gives you the characters that you recognize.
My primary job is to make sure that we tell great stories that are true to the characters that we have, and we will do whatever it takes to make sure that happens.
You may have already answered this one indirectly, but I wanted to know if Sega put down a list of hard restrictions on what Sonic stuff you can or cannot use, like at the beginning. Like say a writer wanted to adapt Sonic Labyrinth and like Sega would step in and say, no, you can't do that. Or a writer wanted to say, put Madonna in the comic.
Or Luigi.
Yeah, or even a character from something else. Does Sega like have limitations, like really hard limitations on what you can or can't use?
So Sega might not step in and say you can't use Sonic Labyrinth, but even if they didn't, I would. Just because that was like my least favorite Sonic game by a mile. But that said, let me actually pass this one over to Mike, who can probably answer better.
Yeah, we didn't put any kind of hard and fast rules saying you can't do this, you can't do that. We approach things on a case-by-case basis and whatever really makes sense for the character and the brand, and just telling the story, of Sonic in general, making sure that we're doing it properly without jumping the shark.
Thank you.
We've learned to hold our really crazy requests till year 2.
Yeah.
Establish ourselves, get them to trust what we're doing, and then we start throwing the real crazy stuff their way.
The Madonna email is in my drafts folder. I haven't sent yet, but give me like 12 months.
When I bring up points in all of my videos, I always show exactly how I came to my conclusion, and am always willing to further elaborate when asked if somebody feels that I didn't provide enough information. Linking me to a blog or an interview of somebody essentially slandering something is not enough confirmation of something to me. I cannot just take one man's word. For me to 100% side with Ian on the mandates, I'm going to need a lot more people from the writing crew to speak out on this, because at this point we only have his word. I find it very hard to believe that Sega just flat out says you cannot do something ever forever. To me, these mandates sound more like IDW running their ideas by Sega and then Sega coming up in specific moments and saying don't do that here, or we don't agree with the decision you made here in this moment of the story, and Ian is taking Sega saying that as you can never do this, or it always has to be this way. These type of mandates wouldn't just apply to comics either. This would be applied to all of the games, any TV show that comes out, and all comics in the future. The Sonic movie is an exception, as Sega has officially stated that they aren't trying to intervene with how the movie is handled. The mandates also wouldn't be stricter toward one piece of media over the other. It would simply apply everywhere, and ignoring them would obviously cost you your job. Unless the writer that's complaining about these mandates often strays way too far from what the company believes their story should be about, or how a character should be handled, in which case that means that Sega doesn't trust the writer very much. Writing mandates are imposed to make sure all of that specific IP stays on brand with itself. For these mandates to only affect Ian Flynn would be impossible, so I don't believe that Ian is the only one coming into contact with the mandates, and clearly Sega does have a lot of faith in him, considering that he's the one that's going to be writing their next main game, Sonic Frontiers. I'm basically just asking for more people to speak out to confirm the strictness of these mandates and how hard it is to work around them. Now, I'm not saying that Ian Flynn is a liar. I'm only saying that extremely lore-breaking mandates like these are pretty hard to believe. To clarify, I do not mean any disrespect toward Ian Flynn nor anybody on the IDW team, and I want to be on their side against all of the mandated nonsense if it means better writing. Unless that better writing leads us back to the Archie days, then I say that these mandates are best left unchanged. But mostly, I hope that nobody from the IDW team are using alleged mandates as a scapegoat to shield themselves from when they make a bad writing decision or choose not to write for a character. Either way, in the future, I'm going to direct these criticisms in a way that points them toward the mandate so that nobody is incorrectly blamed for how something was written. But whatever doesn't have a mandate, well, that's just fair game, baby. There's two plot holes that I encountered in this comic. The first was about Eggman bases. None of Sonic or his friends decided to directly go to Eggman's bases to extract information. The Chaotix then say that they already raided many of Eggman's bases and they had found nothing. Then, after fighting Metal Sonic, Sonic decides to go and attack one of Eggman's bases. And he finds out everything he needs to know about Metal Sonic's current plan. After looking into this plot hole even further, I found that Tails even reconfirms that they've already raided bases in that very same issue that Sonic decides to raid another one. So we now have a scenario where the Chaotix are confirming and Tails is confirming that there's nothing to be found. Some of the smartest characters on the hero side completely found nothing. But when Sonic says he's going to personally raid a base, they find everything they need to know. Literally, what the hell? The Badniks were getting a wide broadcast of all this information. The fact that nothing at all could be found until that point made absolutely no sense. The characters also didn't even have to raid any more bases at all once Metal Sonic revealed himself, because the entire egg fleet was floating toward Angel Island, and not a single character thought, if we want to know what Metal Sonic is doing, we should follow him. The other plot hole is, of course, the Master Emerald turning a character super. Some something it cannot do at all. And I have yet to have anybody come at me with a solid argument past it only works on Metal Sonic. So if you have a better explanation, I'd love to hear it, because Sega has never had a reason for this. And I'd actually like to push this even further, because not only did IDW happily add this scene, but the Mandates themselves have claimed that the Master Emerald does not have any special properties whatsoever. It apparently doesn't do anything, meaning that the Mandates have created one of the biggest plot holes of its own franchise, dating all the way back to Sonic 3 in 1994. If the Master Emerald has no special properties, that statement brings up several questions instantly, such as things like, how does it cancel the Chaos Emeralds? How the hell did Chaos even get sealed into the Master Emerald the first time? How does it make Angel Island float? Tangle the lemur is the tomboy of the comic. When she was first introduced, I got a lot of Sonic vibes coming off of her, and I was pretty certain that she was just going to be a female Sonic posing as a lemur. When Tangle was reintroduced in issue 9, she seemed to have taken on the overly excited fangirl persona and was just constantly gushing over the cast and the fight they were involved in. So hopefully she'll start coming into her own, as she wasn't given any screen time to be developed properly, which is the case for every new character introduced in the Revenge of Neo Metal Saga. The designs of Tangle and the Newcomers are all perfect for the Sonic universe, and they easily fit right in visually as characters, thanks to them all properly incorporating the same distinct Sonic art style. I actually really like Whisper the Wolf's design. It's very off-putting to see Sonic characters with straight-up hair that doesn't come from their fur or feathers. Thanks to proper art direction, the hairstyle for all of the new characters were designed to be like rouges, so now it always looks like their hair comes directly from an obvious place of origin, rather than a character wearing a wig on their heads. Her name, like much of the cast, is very much on the nose. She's a lone wolf and is a literal wolf. She whispers when she talks, and her name is Whisper. Yeah, it's about as creative as calling a character Knuckles the Echidna. Rough and Tumble were two of the first brand new villains introduced. A duo of skunks who take over a village with ease, only to be beaten down by Sonic and Knuckles and then imprisoned. I don't see them as very large villains. Even though they do work alongside Dr. Starline by the end, they seem to be conceptualized similar to Scratch and Grounder, comic relief villains that hold no weight to the story, and I'll be surprised if they do anything of significance after the second saga. Apparently they were mandated to not be allowed to spray anything like a skunk would, yet in their very first appearance they do exactly that to Knuckles. But you know, the Mandates, you know, whatever, the Mandates. Dr. Starline's design is certainly something. He has a 70s-80s vibe to his wardrobe. He's Eggman's biggest fan and already failed at what he set out to do his first time on screen. So we'll see how his character is written in the second saga, and hopefully he can bounce back from failing to get Eggman's memories back. Let's get to the story. I have two minor complaints to get across, and then we'll get to the major issues of this saga. Knuckles is the leader of the Resistance, but Amy calls all the shots in this comic. While I do enjoy Amy having more of a presence, I think it's pretty clear that IDW wants Amy to be the leader of the Resistance. Even so, Knuckles is the leader in Sonic Forces and for this arc. While Amy provided a level of support in the game, the public speeches for plans still falling to Knuckles would make more sense. Knuckles also doesn't act like a leader in this saga. While in Sonic Forces, he very much did. Sure, the Master Emerald is taken over and he cares about it a lot, but essentially the whole world was taken over in Sonic Forces, so it makes absolutely no sense for him to act senseless here and not there. Now, I can definitely see Amy gaining the ability to lead and understand the inner workings of a larger army, considering that she played a large support role in Sonic Forces. But I think they're pushing Amy's leadership way too early. Conveniently, by the end of the saga, Knuckles disbands the Resistance, giving Amy a chance to rise to the occasion. If IDW wants something like that, then please give give it some time to set up, and don't just make something like this already a thing. You're making everybody act out of character by doing this, and it just doesn't make any sense story-wise. Silver's timeline is more of a personal gripe with time being manipulated in any story. The future being ruined and then fixed by the past really doesn't make any sense, and it's always a time paradox. Because if Silver goes back to the past and they fix the problem, then logically speaking, there would not be a future for Silver to have to fix and go back in time from. But also, what even is Silver's future? How far into the future is Silver's timeline? Every time Silver goes back in time, does it create a difference in time? In order for time to be fixed through Silver going back in time, he would have to do something major in every saga that involves time travel. Something so major that it fixes what Silver saw in his timeline, because since it's the past, Silver would have had to be there in order for the event to take place at all. Silver's major move in this arc was saving everybody from certain death after they were all falling. So it just brings many questions. Is Silver's future the true future? Is it an alternate future? If it's the true future, then there's no way that there's a problem because they would have already fixed it a long time ago due to Silver's intervention. If it's an alternate future, how would fixing the past affect his future at all? There's a lot more questions, but time traveling is and always will be one of the most complicated versions of storytelling, especially when dealing with the past fixing the future, because the past changing the future only creates massive plot holes and inconsistencies. If the past fixes the future, then the future would never see the problem. But if the character from the future fixed the future by going to the past, then that future would never have happened and they would not even remember it. If you're going to make a story about time travel, you literally have to plan multiple stories in advance just to make sure that the future looks like how it should in the next 2 sagas. Otherwise, it just creates a question of when the hell did all this happen? If it's the future, then a problem happening right now couldn't affect the future because it should already be fixed because it's the future. And nobody saw it before until now, so how is it a problem now? And the largest problem with the Revenge of Neo Metal Saga is without a doubt the pacing. IDW spent every single issue up to 8 of the 12 introducing 1 or 2 characters and then introduced another new character with Dr. Starline. The Revenge of Neo Metal Saga was basically 12 straight issues of introduction with minor story beats sprinkled within when it should be the other way around. By the time Silver and Whisper finally get into the story, we are literally 1 issue away from the final battle. The fact that we're still introducing characters at this moment makes no sense unless you have a very good reason to still be introducing characters. The majority of the saga's cast should already be introduced by at most the halfway point, or at least they should be mentioned to be doing something by then that's preventing them from joining the cast. The story around Metal Sonic was barely even clinging to the life IDW were trying to give it, because they were so interested in showing off as many characters as they could. When we did get to the finale, it was so underdeveloped and so underwhelming that it felt like it happened before it even began. There really isn't a story to this saga at all. The entire saga is a concept because IDW barely spent any time actually writing a story. What they actually did was fill the majority of these issues with various ways that they could throw another character in, regardless of whether or not it will push the story along in any way at all. So much so, to the point that issues 1 through 4 are literally the exact same plot. Tails' introduction in the first issue gives you everything you need to know to set up the plot, but then Sonic does it all again with Amy and the Knuckles and the Tangle and Blaze. The towns are being attacked. They suspect Eggman is the culprit but need to locate him. That's what happens in all 4 of these issues. There is no narrative change at all. No new information is gathered. They are pointless issues. They need to be reworked entirely, but instead, we get 4 different ways to deliver the exact same plot. There is absolutely no way to justify this. The quote-unquote revelations in these 4 issues could have and should have happened in issue 1. Giving a character an entire issue is not to be confused with giving a character proper screen time. It's better to utilize support characters by giving them roles throughout the entire saga, even if it's just to work alongside the main character, so long as they're visually participating in the story, rather than giving them one thing to do for one issue, finish that, and then make them screw off until the end. If the characters that you want to be your support characters have nothing to do, you're probably not making a very compelling story by presenting them as important characters, and you should just focus on the main character instead of creating scenarios to shoehorn in as much of the cast as you can get. The problem isn't that they had all these characters, it's the fact that next to nobody in the story had a purpose for the overall narrative, so they didn't have to be there at all. Every character that wasn't Sonic or Tails in the first 4 issues could have been swapped with legitimately any character, and nothing about the story would be affected in any way. I could even throw the literal corpse of Tikal with Sonic and have those two go through this adventure, and 90% of the story would be exactly the same. That's how much nobody mattered. Sonic is undeniable in the story's chain of events. He carries the majority of it by himself and is directly involved in everything. Let's play a game. Out of these characters, which ones do you think have any significance to the story? If you said any of these characters, then congratulations, you're wrong. If you said any of these characters, then good job. You understand a bit about storytelling, or you just gave a lucky guess. Now I know, that definitely looks crazy. That's damn near the entire cast removed from this arc, but that is because the story legitimately goes like this. Summarized to its exact plot synopsis, meaning the removal of all filler and story halting, and only the beats that advance the narrative. Sonic sees a town being attacked by badniks. He meets Tails. The two save the town and speculate on the return of Dr. Eggman. Sonic decides to continue searching for other towns under attack. SBO meets with Sonic to discuss that they may have pinpointed Dr. Eggman's location. However, Eggman has amnesia and now refers to himself as Mr. Tinker. Sonic spots the egg fleet flying overhead and gets Tails to fly him up to it. Sonic learns that Metal Sonic has taken on the image of Dr. Eggman. Sonic is forced off the ship and then heads to Resistance HQ, where the team decide to search Eggman's bases for an update to Metal Sonic's plans. Sonic and Silver discover Metal Sonic's plans to take over the Master Emerald. The Resistance fight and defeat Metal Sonic, ending the Revenge of Neo Metal saga. That's 7 issues of actual story and 5 issues of straight filler. The saga only has 12 issues. Each plot in every other issue either had literally no impact to the story whatsoever, it only served to halt the narrative from progressing, or it showed off a plot that they had already done. Rough and Tumble were introduced way too early. If issue 3 was removed, there would legitimately be no difference to the story. Rough and Tumble didn't even interact with Mr. Tinker until issue 10, where they stole him. Otherwise, they had literally no significance to the story whatsoever. These 2 characters were pointless to the entire arc. After removing them from issue 3, they would still take Eggman. Other than that, there was no reason to make Dr. Starline break them out of prison. They should have just made Rough and Tumble already a part of Dr. Starline's team. Simply by being on Dr. Starline's side automatically puts themselves against the heroes. See, there are writers that have this very strange expectation that they need to immediately write a short story to create some sort of reasoning for a character's existence, but then at the same time, they will create a major villain out of thin air like Dr. Starline. Unless you have a valid reason in the narrative, a character doesn't need to be presented in the plot until they have something significant to do. Dr. Starline's motivations were mostly revealed in this issue he was presented in. We know that he's a huge fan of Dr. Eggman, and as the story progresses, it should start to reveal his character. We don't need an entire backstory about him. Sonic sure as hell doesn't have any sort of origin, nor does somebody as young as Tails or Charmy. way. We may learn very minute details about the past as the story goes on, but otherwise these characters literally just exist, and their motivations are clear enough to justify their role, which is true for the majority of characters in a story. It just proves that you don't need to introduce a character 12 issues before they actually need to exist. You introduce a character when they are needed for the narrative. Nothing about Rough and Tumble impacted the story until they stole Dr. Eggman, which was to set up for the next saga. And yes, it is an important scene for the next arc, but it doesn't impact the Revenge of Neo Metal saga. It wasn't until they worked for Dr. Starline and stole Mr. Tinker that they had a purpose. Tangle and Whisper could have had a genuine impact on the overall narrative, but they didn't have any at all because, like everybody else, the writers introduced them full stop. They were introduced and then later they fought Metal Sonic. The end. Their entire introductions could have been completely removed and their characters not even added in yet until after the Revenge of Neo Metal saga. Why? Because once again, they are a pair of characters that had absolutely zero impact on the story. They were introduced because the writers were excited to show off their new characters, which is fine. However, as a writer, you need to ask yourself, what is the purpose of this character? If the answer is because they will be important in a completely different saga, then unless they do something significant in the saga you're currently on, you are introducing the character way too early. One of the major takeaways you need to understand when writing a story is that a character needs to be an active player in the narrative to justify their implied importance. Otherwise, you're just throwing characters in for the fun of it. This isn't applied to characters like Orbot, the Badniks, or even random citizens. Those are side characters. Their purpose may be something such as giving a character a tip, or something so small as giving a character a pep talk, or even a heartwarming moment. They don't actively work in the narrative, but they are also presented as somebody significant. If the concept of Rouge being more important than Tangle doesn't make sense to you, well, it's a good thing I'm about to explain it. Rouge gives a direct line to a specific plot moment, but doesn't have any weight on the story after that. She's by all intents and purposes treated as a side character. Now, sure, Espio and the Chaotix could have just been written to discover where Mr. Tinker was by themselves, rendering Rouge useless. However, that's what a side character does. Rouge wasn't portrayed as a key player like the Chaotix were, she was just utilized to advance the plot. But whatever she's doing otherwise isn't important. Tangle fights Badniks to save her town and is introduced along with Blaze. Both do not do anything significant in advancing the story, as they just deliver more of the same story we already knew from issue 1. That may seem like a very strict way I describe that, so let me present exceptions, and as a writer, you should be able to recognize and know when to use these exceptions. Shadow is a character that I said had no significance in the plot. However, his introduction does actually work, and here's why. Issue 5 is a significant issue, and it pushes the plot along. We discover Mr. Tinker and the Chaotix are introduced as detectives and play a pivotal role in finding Eggman. Shadow then arrives to fight Sonic, thanks to the intervention of Rouge with the Chaotix. The fight with Sonic bleeds into issue 6, and while it could be removed from the narrative, which would mean that issue 5 would simply end with Sonic coming to the decision that Mr. Tinker is not a threat. Instead, this is an example of good filler. It happens in the moments of the narrative and argues a secondary perspective. It doesn't just go over information we already learned, it instead further explores the plot that we're currently on while simultaneously giving characters motivations, backstory, and introductions, all in just 2 issues. It goes on until the resolution, where everybody decides that Mr. Tinker is not a threat, a point that the cast was actively debating until 2 characters, Sonic and Shadow, forced a resolution. Something like this can go on for too long, and you can use this method way too much by introducing a character just to push the plot along, but thankfully, they were able to use Shadow and Rouge properly, making it good pacing. Now, let's compare that to issues 1 through 4. This is an example of bad filler. In issue 1, we learned everything we need to know to get us prepared for issue 5. Badnik's attacking the towns, the heroes have to save them, they speculate Eggman did it, but don't know where he is, end plot. Sonic goes to another town being attacked by Badniks and meets Amy. They question if Eggman is behind it, end plot. Same with meeting Knuckles into Blaze and Tangle. After issue 1 ends, issue 2 is now a brand new plot in the narrative, and so on and so on. So why are we still repeating the same questions and scenes just with different characters? The problem is that after issue 1, the story legitimately pauses until issue 5. While issue 5 doesn't have a proper ending, it spills directly into issue 6. It's clear to me that IDW didn't know what else to write to start the comic, but as a writer, you should definitely have some idea of how your story is going to go before you start writing it. Thankfully, there is an easy solution that pretty much any story with a lot of characters will do to prevent something like the first 4 issues of this. You start here. Make issue 4 the new issue 1, and not only that, instead of having Sonic fighting with Blaze and Tangle, have Knuckles, Tails, and Amy helping him instead. And if you're just that good at writing, you can still have Tangle and Blaze show up. And now we're ready for issue 5! Or preferably anything else that won't halt the story, and then after that eventually lead into issue 5, or issue 6, whatever it is at that case, so the story won't end way too fast. Congratulations! You've introduced everything that sets up the story, and you've even introduced your main character, 3 supporting characters, and maybe even 2 tertiary characters, all in one issue. This method can be applied to the beginning of almost any story, and it immediately jumpstarts the plot, while simultaneously introducing the audience to the characters. Now, true, writing itself is fluid, and there is no definitive way to write. It is good to know that you can push the envelope and bend the rules of writing. However, you need to actually know what it is you're doing in order to bend these rules, and understand why the tried and true writing styles have become such staples as they are in the first place before you set out to break those rules. And for the respect of the medium, please figure out what goes into creating a story before you just start throwing together a bunch of ideas you think sound cool. Ideas are cheap. Execution is everything. This was the first saga to the IDW comic, and they had better count their blessings that they have an already established fan base from their Archie days, and also be happy that by simply throwing in a character to any story, no matter the reason, will make Sonic fans bust innumerous amounts of nuts at just the thought of one of their favorite characters saying hello, even if they immediately leave the story right after. I think that as a first saga, they spent way too much time focusing on how many characters they can show off in order to get the hype train moving, and as a result, they had heavily stunted their narrative. The majority of the plot points were few and far between, such to the point that they even invited a plot hole from forgetting that characters had already done something. The plot points of this story are so minimal that you could split it into 5 issues and get the same exact result that this saga achieved. There was no actual storyline to these 12 issues, and that is such a crime to get away with. Going forward, IDW needs to make sure they're always putting narrative first and leaving out fan service that hinders the plot. Dr. Eggman not being who he was pretending to be is a pretty easy guess. Them awkwardly not showing Eggman behind the chair was a dead giveaway that it was somebody else. There's no reason that they didn't just flat out show Eggman behind the chair, considering Metal Sonic manages to look exactly like him when he takes his appearance on. The final battle of the saga was boring, and they engage in combat with Neo Metal Sonic only twice to be interrupted by something every 4 hits. On top of that, the characters were heavily underutilized in the final fight, just as much as they were in everything leading up to the battle. I understand that stories like this show off the rest of their cast fighting when a war is happening, but when there is no visual of if they're winning or not, and they're just doing a montage of absolutely random things during the fight, and then they just win by hopping onto one of the 8 characters, it just makes it feel tacked on. Especially when your title fight is literally just, oh yeah! Oh, Oh yeah! Oh yeah! The end. If you're gonna build up an important fight, then issue 7 is a decent example of how to do it. The majority of that issue is just straight fighting with minor story moments in between, while the beginning and end of the issue advance the plot. There is no payoff in finally getting to this big foreshadow moment just to be like, and then they won. Could you imagine if Goku finally met Frieza, immediately went Super Saiyan, hit him 5 times and the battle was over? Like, wow. All that build up for what? I would personally still like more well choreographed one-on-one fights or some well thought out multi-character fights, as opposed to Sonic fighting the Badniks while being chased by Metal Sonic, or how Sonic and Knuckles couldn't even hurt Metal Sonic until Shadow showed up, to which Metal Sonic was like, well, I'm just gonna get bigger then. I did enjoy reading the Revenge of Neo Metal Saga as a Sonic fan. There were loads of references I understood. I didn't need to read 30 issues of Knuckles the Echidna to understand one random event. The dialogue felt a lot more believable than anything that was put out during the Archie days. I knew everything from the games that they were trying to incorporate into the comics, and I could immediately tell if they were doing it properly or not. It's an extremely easy plot to follow when it presents itself. I am, however, aware that Tangle and Whisper have spin-off comics, as do a couple of the villains. I don't think it's right to have major revelations happening in spin-offs, especially if they start being incorporated into the main story. I think it disrupts the flow and convolutes the plot the more that they do it, making things harder to follow as time goes on. You can't have something going on in an arc and then in the middle of it create 2 spin-offs that directly link into the saga. If you're gonna have spin-offs, and if it does directly impact the actual plot of the saga, then there's little to no excuse for it to not just be part of the issues in the main storyline. The Revenge of Neo Metal Saga is extremely low-tier storytelling. In fact, it isn't even a story at all. It's a reveal that IDW is making a Sonic comic, and because of that, it's a very poor start to what could be a very good comic book series. The overuse of characters that have no weight in the narrative, mixed with flashy scenes, don't make for a good story. I know the team at IDW have enough potential to make something good enough to read, but their writing really needs to improve in the next arc. It needs to actually be planned out, rather than just throwing together whatever comes to mind in that moment. And please, let it have a satisfactory resolution. Like, comment, subscribe, sell your soul, follow me on Twitter, okay, bye!